10 years ago, I was in my 30s and had just married my husband. At that time, I had no idea what was going on and spent a lot of time doubting him. Even before we married, he worked hard, so I expected life with him to be challenging. However, he was absent so often that I felt completely alone. When he was home, I tried to make it a relaxing haven for him. Despite my efforts, my frustration grew. I became harsh every time I saw him. My husband would try to soothe me, but if I remained unsatisfied, he began to ignore me. I wanted him to pay attention to me, no matter how busy he was with work. This desire clouded my judgment, and I could no longer view him objectively. Whenever we argued, he would say, "I'll settle down soon, and then we'll go to that island you like." But that promise was never fulfilled. "Work is more important than me, isn't it?" I once said. "If so, don't force yourself to come home. I'm tired too, and seeing you so exhausted makes me sad." No matter how many hurtful things I said, he never took them seriously, and I began to feel our marriage was unraveling. Eventually, he could tell I had no feelings left for him. At first, I didn't suspect anything because his job required frequent business trips. But one day, after he returned from a trip, I found a receipt and a membership card for a hotel near our house in his suit pocket. The receipt showed he had stayed at the hotel on a night he was supposedly out of town, and he had accumulated points for more than one stay. As a successful businessman, my husband was popular with the ladies at work. I guess he had found another woman. Why should I struggle while he enjoys being with someone else? I thought. So I began going out at night and making weekend plans despite his infidelity. It was fun for a while, but eventually, I grew tired. I was tired of forcing myself to smile and unable to truly enjoy myself. Perhaps it was finally time for my husband and me to be free. We were both avoiding each other, not facing each other as husband and wife. It would be better if my husband was happier with someone else. I suppose it's time for me to move on to the next chapter of my life. But this was the man I used to love, until I realized I didn't want to spend the rest of my life with him. It took a lot of courage for me to ask for a divorce. I also wondered if there was really no other option but to call it quits. But it seems that my husband has a new girlfriend. After days of deliberation, I made a decision and sent a text message to my husband's cell phone. "Will you come home early today? I need to talk to you." "I need to talk to you too, and I'll try to leave as soon as possible," he replied right away. I found myself thinking that my husband must not want a divorce, even though I was certain I had made my decision. But he must also be seeking a divorce. Just thinking about it made my heart race so fast that I couldn't breathe, and I struggled to stand. My husband's heart was not with me, it was with someone else. Let's not cry anymore. At the very least, I should end things with a smile. I made my decision and waited for my husband to return home. It was shortly after 9 p.m. when he walked in. He'd lost an unexpected amount of weight. His kind eyes and tone of voice remained the same, but there was a gap between us that seemed insurmountable. My husband, who had never been a man of many words, kept looking down and remained silent except for a few words while I spoke. I wanted to end our conversation respectfully because I felt he was mocking me. We were a married couple, albeit for a short time, and we were about to divorce, so why wouldn't he tell me how he felt? I became increasingly angry and began to argue with him. However, he remained silent and listened to what I had to say. I wanted him to say something, so I told him that I knew about his new girlfriend. He probably thought I was oblivious. If he knew I knew everything, he would become impatient and make one excuse after another. Hearing my words, my husband looked at me in surprise, then smiled briefly. After a pause, he asked, "What, you knew?" Strangely, I couldn't help but laugh at his joking tone, which made him laugh too. For the first time in a long while, we laughed together. Despite the situation, I was overjoyed to share a moment of laughter with him. After that, we were able to talk again, which felt strange. Perhaps it was because he realized I knew about the affair. My husband's face appeared revitalized. "Let's stop attacking each other. I don't want to leave you because I don't like you," he said. My husband agreed to my proposal, and we decided to clean our room and sort our belongings so we could leave at any time. They were all precious memories, but they were things I wanted to hide for a while. My husband, always the type to use things he's had for years, didn't hesitate to throw them away today. His grace overwhelmed me even more. "Take anything you want. It's all my fault, so this is my atonement," he said. When the room was clean and tidy with only our belongings left, my husband's eyes seemed on the verge of tears. Did he feel sad as he cleaned up the mess? It was clear to me because I felt the same way. You still have time to think about it, don't you? Let's clean up one step at a time. After cleaning up, I decided to take a break for the rest of the day. I took a bath to clear my mind. I should be able to get compensation for my unfaithful husband, but it was clear that our relationship had already ended. Besides, I didn't want to taint my memories of my husband any further. As I was getting ready for bed after the bath, my husband entered the bedroom. He climbed into bed and gently drew me into his arms. "Hey, this is weird, and I feel bad for your girlfriend," I said. My husband quietly responded, "Just one more time. I want to be by your side." I stiffened slightly. He was trembling as he wrapped his arms around me. "Are you crying?" I asked him, but he didn't respond. I noticed that his body was lighter and more bony as I stroked his back. "Are you sure you're well? You appear to have shed some pounds." When I said this to him, his body stopped shaking. "I've been cutting weight," he said, pulling his body away from mine and taking a deep breath. "Okay, is there anything else I should know? Are you sure you're okay?" It had been a long time since I had touched my husband's body, and I was surprised to see how different it looked from before. My husband's physique was always stocky and muscular. Even when he was busy, he enjoyed working out, but he told me, "She likes me like this." I felt sad once more. He was doing it for her. Why doesn't he just forget about me if he enjoys being with her so much that he loses weight? I see. Then there's no need to cry because it's the last day. Or are those tears of joy? To keep my sadness at bay, I said something sarcastic that I didn't need to say. "You're still the same. I like that part of you too. I wish you a happy life from tomorrow. I'll be praying for you wherever you are," my husband said lightly. After saying that, my husband began to snore. He was a man who moved at his own pace until the end. I hope so as well. I fell asleep after murmuring to his sleeping face. I overslept the next day because I had stayed up late cleaning up the room the night before. My husband was no longer in bed when I awoke. When I entered the living room, I noticed an A4-size envelope on the table. When I opened it, I discovered a bank book and a slew of documents inside. When I removed everything, I saw that it was related to marital property. There was also an unusually large sum of money in the bank book in my name. I discovered the divorce papers in a small envelope. My husband's section had already been filled out, so all that remained was for me to complete and submit mine. In a panic, I tried calling my husband's cell phone, only to find it disconnected. I spent days reaching out to his parents and friends, desperate for any clue about his whereabouts. But no one could provide answers. Finally, I contacted his former company, where I learned that my workaholic husband had resigned months ago. It would have made sense if he had left for a new relationship, but why disappear without a word? Why did no one inform me? Growing suspicious and mentally exhausted from the ordeal that began even before our divorce, I found out my husband had arranged compensation for me. With newfound freedom, I decided to retreat to a place I cherished deeply. The remote island, nearly a day's journey from the mainland, had only about 3,000 inhabitants. I had visited it once with my husband and was enchanted by its natural beauty and tranquil pace of life. My husband had promised we would return once his work settled down. Though I missed him dearly, perhaps what I needed now was the peace and solitude of that island. Months later, after renting out my house and quitting my job, I took the plunge and moved to the remote island. It was a risky decision, but staying in our house alone was unbearable with so many memories. I couldn't let my husband's efforts go to waste. There were many unanswered questions, but with no way to contact him, I resolved to immerse myself in island life. I began to adjust, getting to know my neighbors and becoming involved in helping the elderly with their daily challenges. Initially seen as an outsider, I gradually earned acceptance as a member of the island community. Though I had enough resources to live comfortably without working, I found that idleness only deepened my sense of melancholy. So, I embraced my role as a helper, finding purpose in aiding my new neighbors and slowly finding my place in this quiet, welcoming island community. As I settled into life on the island, I learned from a colleague that a new client had arrived for medical treatment from the mainland. He had chosen this quiet place as his final residence due to a lack of treatment options elsewhere. Living on an island without medical facilities posed challenges, and when the new client requested a visit, I volunteered since I was available. Aware of his condition, I felt apprehensive as I made my way to his house, a small renovated dwelling perched on a hill overlooking the ocean. The house, though basic and weathered, seemed barely sufficient to shield against the elements. I wondered if it was truly suitable for someone spending their final days there. With a mix of worrying and curiosity, I rang the doorbell. "Come in," a weak voice called out, barely audible over the wind. I entered cautiously, offering my customary greeting. Inside, my client sat by the window, sunlight filtering through. His face was obscured by backlight, and as I approached, I squinted to see him clearly. "It's a pleasure to meet you today, sir," I began politely. As he turned towards me, I froze in disbelief. It was my husband, or rather, my ex-husband, sitting there. We both were stunned into silence, just staring at each other. Finally, my husband broke the silence. "You found me," he said with a mischievous smile, reminiscent of old times. "What are you doing here?" I managed to ask, my confusion evident. His unexpected presence, coupled with what I had heard at work, left me speechless and unsure of what to make of this encounter. My husband took my hand and gently guided me to sit beside him. Holding my hand, he helped me calm down as tears continued to flow silently. I struggled to find words, lost in the whirlwind of emotions, when a voice interrupted from the doorway. Wiping away my tears, I opened the door to find an elderly man standing there. He seemed taken aback by my tear-streaked face but greeted me with a bow before entering and settling down next to my husband. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, his voice soft and comforting. My husband reassured him that everything was fine and began conversing with him. It dawned on me that this elderly man was likely the island's only doctor. I recalled hearing from colleagues about the island's lack of medical facilities, where the clinic and its staff were crucial for the community's well-being. It became clear that my husband had come here to spend his final days. Although it was his choice, I listened intently to their conversation, wondering if there was any way I could help. After about 10 minutes of casual talk, the doctor excused himself and left. Unable to contain myself, I hurried after him. My disheveled appearance seemed to startle him again, but as I explained our connection, he seemed to understand. I pressed the doctor for information about my husband's condition and his future treatment, but he responded solemnly, "I can't disclose that without his consent." Perhaps sensing my distress, he added softly, "He won't be able to walk on his own much longer. It would be a shame for him to spend his final days alone. Please be there for him." His words left me stunned. What had happened to my husband's girlfriend? Returning to the house with leaden steps, I found my husband waiting for me. He seemed to have anticipated my conversation with the doctor and greeted me with a gentle smile. "You're back." Unable to imagine life without him, I asked if I could stay the night. His house held only a few belongings and a couple of futons. It was the first time we had slept together since discussing divorce. As we lay under the covers, we shared stories of how we had ended up here. I wanted desperately to inquire about his illness, but I decided it wasn't the right time to broach such painful subjects. Instead, we reminisced. My mind kept circling back to thoughts of his relationship with her. Before agreeing to stay, I asked if he had brought her to the island. He chuckled softly and evaded the question. His silence hinted at a sorrowful event left unspoken. I treated carefully, avoiding any questions that might hurt his feelings. The next day, I informed my employer about the situation and decided to take a break from work. I wanted to cherish whatever time my husband had left. With him unable to walk far, I pushed him around the island in a wheelchair. There were spots I remembered from my earlier visit, and new sights I wanted to share with him. Being together was fulfilling in itself. I wish we had been closer during our marriage. Even after our divorce, my feelings for him had only grown stronger. But there was nothing to be done about it now. Telling him would only confuse him. I resolved to stay by his side like a friend. Though there were fleeting moments of happiness, the disease was gradually wearing him down. His physical strength diminished to the point where outings, even the longed-for walks, were no longer possible. Daily tasks became a struggle, and he began to doze off more frequently. The doctor visited daily, and though he was no longer in pain, I struggled to accept that his departure was inevitable. I devoted myself to caring for my husband, never leaving his side so he wouldn't awaken alone, as he could stir at any moment. Sometimes he would wake and share fragments of dreams just dreamed, or recount memories from long ago as though they were recent events. Each moment with him was cherished, yet this deep love intensified my sorrow. Gradually, he ceased waking altogether. Even in silence, I remained by his side, reading his beloved books and describing the world around us so he might still perceive it. One day, wanting to share the beauty of a sunset, I held his cold hand and spoke softly. His hand lay cold in mine, his breathing shallow and irregular. Fear gripped me, and I called the doctor urgently. He promised to come immediately. Waiting felt like my heart was being torn from my chest, the situation spiraling beyond my control. I prayed it was a misunderstanding. Yearning for reassurance, I pleaded with the doctor to tell me everything would be all right. But when he arrived, his expression grave, he examined my husband and gently said, "His blood pressure has dropped significantly. Let him pass peacefully. He wants you here. I'll wait outside, but I'm close if you need me." With a final goodbye to my husband, the doctor left. The moment had arrived. I had known it would come. Yet the pain was unbearable. Meeting you was a joy. Despite the challenges, my love for you only grew stronger. I held my husband's hand and whispered softly into his ear. To my surprise, he gently squeezed my hand back, a gesture medically improbable but unmistakably real. Shortly afterward, he peacefully breathed his last. Tears flowed uncontrollably, yet I found solace in being there for him until the end. The days that followed his passing were a blur of activity, leaving me little time to grieve until after the burial. Arriving home after sorting through my husband's belongings, I noticed a mountain of accumulated mail. Sorting through them one by one, I was struck by the familiar handwriting on the envelopes. My husband had written numerous letters chronicling our days together. They began on the day we reunited. He had moved here hoping to find me, never imagining he actually would. He could have contained his surprise and joy. One letter read. I chuckled at his humor, finding his sentiments the greatest compliment. The dates on the letters revealed daily posts. Though as his illness progressed, his handwriting grew shaky, the letters shorter. With a heavy heart, I continued reading until one letter halted me in my tracks. In it, he revealed the truth about our divorce. His illness had begun during our marriage. Upon learning of it, treatments proved futile, only adding side effects. Knowing the burden it would place on me, he planned our divorce, sparing me a life overshadowed by his illness. He never imagined I would suspect there was another woman, but he didn't deny it, believing compensation could mend things. Since I no longer needed medical care, I wanted to liquidate my assets so you could live freely, he penned. His words cut deep, knowing he had thought so far ahead for me. I wept uncontrollably, apologizing sincerely. Then came a knock at the door. Hastily wiping my tears, I opened it to find my doctor standing there with a sealed envelope, identical to the ones my husband had written. "What brings you here, doctor?" I asked. He handed me the envelope, explaining he asked me to send these daily. He managed a few days' worth before slipping into a coma. "This is the final letter, meant for you upon your return home." It was my husband's last communication. Thanking the doctor, I read it in solitude. Quietly and composedly, I unfolded the thin yet profound note. "Thank you. I love you." Though separated by time and distance, our hearts remained intertwined. "I love you too," I whispered, sensing a faint smile from his portrait. Decades have passed, and I am now a recognized island resident. Beside where his house once stood, I erected a grave on the day I decided never to leave the island. My husband used to gaze out that window daily, and I believe he still does. One day, I will join him there. Surrounded by memories, I am at peace and content. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Farewell until we meet again.